Our host tonight is Sue Turnbull. Sue is Professor of Communication and Media Studies at the University of Wollongong. She's a frequent media commentator and reviewer for the Sydney Morning Herald. Sue's a past judge of the Age Book of the Year and of the Vic Premier's Literary Awards. And since 1992, she's been co-convener of the influential network Sisters in Crime Australia, who we're also pleased to partner with on presenting tonight's event. She will be in conversation with the fabulous Kate Atkinson. Kate was born in York and now lives in Edinburgh. Her first novel, Behind the Scenes at the Museum, won the Whitbread Book of the Year award and has been a critically acclaimed international best-selling author ever since. Case Histories introduced her readers to Jackson Brodie, former police inspector turned private investigator, and also won the Saltire Book of the Year award and the Prix Westminster. Kate was awarded an MBE in the Queen's 2011 birthday honours for services to literature. And her new novel, which will be the focus of tonight's event, Life After Life, I don't know how many of you had read it, it's absolutely fabulous. You're in for a total treat if you haven't yet. It's currently shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction and asks the tantalising question, what if you had the chance to live your life again and again until you finally got it right? Please join me in welcoming Sue Turnbull and Kate Atkinson.
There you go. Well, good evening. And delighted to be in Melbourne again. And welcome to all the sisters in crime in the audience. I'm usually introducing events for Sisters in Crime when I'm in Melbourne, and our old hangout used to be Leo's Spaghetti Bar, the back room thereof with the mirror ball. So we've definitely come up in the world, I'm delighted to say, Kate. And it is my very great pleasure tonight to be talking to Kate Atkinson, who, of course, does write and has written a bit of crime, if we can call it that, really, because you've written very different sorts of books. But we're going to hear from Kate tonight, and she's actually going to do a reading for us from the latest book, which is Life After Life. So, Kate, over to you.
Thank you. It's lovely to be back in Melbourne. I'm going to read from Life After Life, as Sue said. I've never read this passage before, so we're in this together, okay? The reason I haven't read it is because I have to explain it. It occurs in the middle of the book. Life After Life is about a woman called Ursula Todd, who's born again and again and again in a snowstorm on February 11th, 1910. In a house called Fox Corner, and her father is Hugh, her mother is Sylvie, she has a brother Morris who's older, a sister Pamela who's older, and her brothers Teddy and Jimmy who are younger. And Hugh has a difficult sister called Izzy, who is difficult in all ways. It's quite hard to explain Izzy, but she's had a lot of economic misfortune. After the war, she was one of those singleton women, and she took up journalism, and she's about to have a change in career. And this scene actually will trigger many, many horrible things that are going to happen to Ursula. Although it appears to be very pleasant, it is actually a kind of a fulcrum in the book for really many bad things that will happen in one of her lives. But it's also a change in fortunes for Izzy as well, because this is Ursula's 16th birthday. Sweet 16, Hugh said, kissing her affectionately. Happy birthday, little bear. Your future's all ahead of you. Ursula still harboured the feeling that some of her future was also behind her, but she had learned not to voice such things. Coincidentally, Morris was down for the weekend, although he had forgotten that it was Ursula's birthday. He was in his last year at Oxford, where he was reading law and was more of a prig than ever, according to Pamela. His parents didn't seem particularly taken with him either. He is mine, isn't he? Ursula had overheard Hugh say to Sylvie. You didn't have a dalliance in Deauville with that terrifically boring chap from Halifax, the one who owned the mill. What a memory you have, Sylvie laughed. Millie Shawcross, Ursula's friend, was also invited to tea and had arrived early, her usual chirpy self. Morris had brought two friends to stay for the weekend, Gilbert and an American, Howard. Call me Howie, everybody does. who were going to have to double up in the spare room bed, a fact that seemed to make Sylvie uneasy. The fact that Howie was an American gave him a special kind of glamour, although it was Gilbert who had the brooding, rather exotic movie star looks. His name, Gilbert Armstrong, and his father, a High Court judge, and his education, Stowe, pointed to impeccably English credentials, but his mother was the scion of an old Spanish aristocratic family. "Oh my," Millie whispered to Ursula, "the gods walk amongst us." She crossed her hands over her heart and flapped them like wings. "Well, not Morris," Ursula said. "He would have been kicked off Olympus for getting on everyone's nerves." "The Self-Importance of Gods," Millie said. "What a wonderful title for a novel." Millie, needless to say, wanted to be a writer, or an artist, or a singer, or a dancer, or an actress, anything where she might be the centre of attention. Strangely, girls did find Morris attractive, a fact that continually surprised the women in his own family. He had fair hair that looked as if it had been marcelled and a strapping physique from rowing, but it was hard to overlook his charmlessness. Gilbert, on the other hand, was even now kissing Sylvie's hand. "Oh," said Millie, "can it get any better?" Morris had introduced Sylvie as "my old mater," and Gilbert said, "You're too young to be anyone's mother." "I know," Sylvie said. "A rather louche fellow," was Hugh's verdict. The three young men seemed to fill Fox Corner as if the house had suddenly shrunk, and both Hugh and Sylvie were relieved when Morris suggested they go outside for a tour of the grounds. The three of them ran out into the garden in Olympian fashion, sportive rather than sacred, and commenced a hearty kickabout with a ball that Morris had found in the hall cupboard. "Mine, actually," Teddy pointed out to no one in particular. "They'll ruin the lawn," Hugh said, observing them howling like hooligans as they chewed up the grass with their muddy brogues. "Oh," Izzy said when she arrived and caught sight of this athletic trio through the window. "I say, they're rather gorgeous, aren't they? Can I have one?" Izzy, swathed from head to toe in fox fur, said, "I brought gifts," an unnecessary announcement as she was laden with all kinds of different shaped parcels in expensive wrapping for my favourite niece. Ursula hadn't seen Izzy in months, not since a fleeting visit to Swiss Cottage in the car with Hugh to drop off a crate full of vegetables from Fox Corner's bountiful late summer garden. "A marrow," Izzy said, inspecting the contents of the box. "What on earth am I supposed to do with that?" Prior to that, she had visited for a long weekend, but had more or less ignored everyone except Teddy, whom she took off for long walks and quizzed relentlessly. "I think she's singled him out from the herd," Ursula told Pamela. "Why?" Pamela said. "So she can eat him." When questioned, Teddy was mystified as to why he'd received special attention. "She just asked me what I did, what school was like, what my hobbies were, what I like to eat, my friends, stuff like that." "Maybe she wants to adopt him," Hugh said to Sylvie. "Or sell him. I'm sure Ted would bring a good price." The first of Ursula's presents to be unwrapped was a recording by Bessie Smith, which Izzy immediately placed on the gramophone, home usually to Elgar and Hugh's favourite, the Mikado. "The St. Louis Blues," Izzy said instructively. "Ursula loves this music." I should say that we're in 1926. "Do you?" Hugh asked Ursula. "I had no idea." Then a lovely tooled red leather edition of Dante in translation was produced. This was followed by a satin and lace bed jacket, which was pronounced far too grown up by Sylvie. Ursula wears flannelette. Next, a bottle of Shalimar, new by Guerlain Devine, as he said, which received a similar verdict from Sylvie. Finally, from this cornucopia, a bottle of champagne, and definitely far too young for that. A perplexed Hugh glared at Izzy. "Did you steal all this?" he asked. "Hey, darky music," Harry said, when the three boys returned from the outdoors, crowding into the drawing room and smelling vaguely of bonfires and something less definable. "Essence of stag," Izzy murmured, sniffing the air. Bessie Smith was now on her third go-round, and Hugh said, "It begins to grow on one after a while." Howie did some kind of odd dance to the music, vaguely barbaric, and then whispered something in Gilbert's ear. Gilbert laughed rather crudely for someone with blue blood, albeit foreign, and Sylvie clapped her hands and said, "Boys, how about some potted shrimps?" and marshalled them into the dining room when she noticed too late the dirty footprints they had tracked through the house. "They didn't fight in the war," Hugh said, as if that explained their muddy spoor. And that's a good thing, Sylvie said firmly, no matter how unsatisfactory they turn out. Now, Izzy said, when the cake was cut and apportioned, I have one last gift. Oh, for goodness sake, Izzy, Hugh interrupted, unable to contain his exasperation any longer. Who is paying for this? You have no money. Your debts are piled to the rafters. You promised you would learn economy. I am paying, Izzy said very grandly, and this is not a present for Ursula. It is for Teddy. Me? Teddy said, startled onto centre stage. He'd been thinking what a jolly good cake it was and wondering what the chances of a second piece were, and certainly had no desire to be pushed into the limelight. Yes, you, darling boy, Izzy said. Teddy visibly shrank away from both Izzy and the present that she put on the table in front of him. Go on, Izzy said, encouragingly. Unwrap it. It won't explode. But it would. Gingerly, Teddy removed the expensive paper. Unwrapped, the present turned out to be exactly what it looked like when wrapped. A book. Ursula, sitting opposite, tried to decipher the upside-down title. The Adventures of Augustus, Teddy read out loud. Why is everything an adventure with you? Sylvie said irritably to Izzy. Because life is an adventure, of course. I would say it was more of an endurance race, Sylvie said, or an obstacle course. Oh, my dear, Hugh said, suddenly solicitous. Not that bad, surely. Anyways, he said, back to Teddy's present. The thick card of the cover was green. The lettering and line drawings were gold. Illustrations of a boy, roughly Teddy's age, wearing a schoolboy's cap. He was accompanied by a catapult and a small dog, a scruffy West Highland terrier. The boy was dishevelled and had a wild look on his face. That's Augustus, Izzy said to Teddy. What do you think? I've based him on you. Me, Teddy said, horrified. But I don't look like that. It's not even the right dog. Something astonishing. Give anyone a lift back to town, Izzy asked casually. Oh, you haven't got another car, Hugh moaned. I parked at the foot of the drive, Izzy said sweetly, so as not to annoy you. They all trooped down the drive to inspect the car. On tick, no doubt, Hugh said. Not at all, Izzy said. Paid up in full, in cash. I have a publisher. I have money, Hugh. You don't need to worry about me anymore. While everyone was admiring, or not, in the case of Hugh and Sylvie, the cherry-bright vehicle, Millie said, I have to go. I have a dancing exhibition tonight. Thank you very much for lovely tea, Mrs. Todd. And Ursula said, come on, I'll walk you back. On the return home through the well-worn shortcut at the bottom of the gardens, Ursula had an unexpected encounter. This was the something amazing, not Izzy's ostentura, when she almost tripped over Howie on his hands and knees, rooting amongst the bushes. Looking for the ball, he said apologetically. It was your kid brother's. I think we lost it in the... He sat back on his heels and looked around helplessly at the berberis and buddleia. Shrubbery, Ursula supplied. Huh? He said, standing up in one clean move and suddenly towering above her. He looked as though he boxed. Indeed, there was a bruise below his eye. He smelled of bay rum, Hugh's scent, and there was something polished and new about him, like a freshly minted coin. Did you find it? She asked. The ball? She sounded squeaky to her own ears. She had thought Gilbert was the handsome one out of the two, but faced with Howie's clean-limbed, uncomplicated strength, like a large animal, she felt stupid. How old are you? He asked. 16, she said. It's my birthday. You ate cake. Clearly she wasn't the only stupid one. Hooey, he said. An ambiguous kind of word, closely related to his own name, she noted, although it seemed to signal amazement, as if reaching 16 was a feat. You're shivering, he said. It's freezing out here. I can warm you up, he said. And then, there's something astonishing. He took her by the shoulders and pulled her towards him, and, an action that necessitated bending down quite a bit, pushed his big lips against hers. Kiss seemed too courtly a word for what Howie was doing. He prodded his enormous tongue, like an ox's, against the portcullis of her teeth, and she was amazed to realize that he was expecting her to open her mouth and let the tongue in. She would choke, for sure. Ursula was debating what to do. The bay rum and the lack of oxygen were making her dizzy, when they heard Morris shouting quite nearby, Howie, leaving without you, chum. Ursula's mouth was released, and without a word to her, Howie yelled, coming, so loudly that her ears hurt. Then he let go of her and set off, crashing through the bushes, leaving Ursula gasping for air. She wandered back to the house in a daze. Everyone was still on the drive, even though it felt like hours had passed, but she supposed it was only minutes, really, like the best fairy stories. In the dining room, the ruins of the cake were being licked delicately by the cat. The Adventures of Augustus, lying on the table, had a smear of icing on it. Ursula's heart was still palpitating from the shock of Harry's advances. To be kissed on her 16th birthday and in such an unlooked-for way seemed a considerable accomplishment. She was surely passing beneath the triumphal arch that led to womanhood. Teddy appeared, very browned off, and said, "They lost my ball." "I know," Ursula consoled. He opened the book at the title page where in a flamboyant hand Izzy had inscribed, "To my nephew Teddy, my own darling Augustus." "What rot," Teddy said, scowling. Ursula picked up a half-drunk glass of champagne, the rim of which was adorned with red lipstick, and poured half of it into a jelly glass that she handed to Teddy. "Cheers," she said. They chinked their glasses and drained them to the dregs. "Happy birthday," Teddy said.
Thank you, Kate. And I just loved that passage because it also is a moment when she is 16, but she might not have been. And I actually wanted you to talk about the structure of the book because, in fact, Ursula dies, and then she doesn't die, and then she continues, and then something else happens to her. And when I was reading the book, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, it's sliding doors. Do you remember Kenny in South Park? Who killed Kenny? Every episode, somebody killed Kenny. Ursula keeps dying, but then we go back and she relives her life a different way. And it's an extraordinary book because at the end, you actually end almost at the beginning, at the moment when she's born. So that there's a way in which the book continues to loop and play with time. And obviously this was something that you were very keen to try out. What was in your mind when you were coming up with this structure? What were you attempting to do?
I had a book that I used to call Parallel Lives that I knew I would never write, that was about someone who was born as a woman and then as a man and then as a dog and as a tree and all these different lives. And I think that was the basis of this structure. But I knew it would never work. And I also knew that in Ursula I had a character who I wanted to... I needed her to die and come back because I needed her to experience the war so that she would then try and do something about the war, so that I could just have brought her back once, I suppose, but I much preferred this idea because I like structure a lot. And I like the rhythm of this book because it was actually very easy to write because unlike a crime novel plot, which is very complicated and which is very woven and you go back all the time, you have to put things in and see things and you never feel you're really advancing, or I don't. Anyway, I wanted to write something that I knew would just flow, and so that I always know she's going to die and then she's going to live again and she's going to die. So there's a perfect rhythm for just carrying on in this kind of harmonious way, really.
But there's an extraordinary what-if about it, in the sense that the various deaths she has are accidents, and they're accidents which happen in a moment. And I suspect we've all had that feeling of, what if I had not made that move? That could have been me. You know, I might not be here had I done that. If I had been... I mean, we were just talking earlier. I was in London in 2007, and I left 2 days before the bombing, but I was on the very street where those bombs happened. And it's that kind of sense that you somehow or other weren't there. And then there are times, of course, when you are. But I wondered if that, too, was that sense of what if, which runs through all your books, really.
Well, I think, all life is about what if, isn't it, I suppose? Because you always look back and think, if I had got a better grade in that Latin A-level, my whole life would be different. But then you always get rid of your children in these fantasies, and then you realise that that's wrong, and you have to come back and put them in. So I think... I have a character called Franklin, who, again, I haven't written. I have a lot of unwritten stuff, who is going to be... He's actually in some stories I'm writing, and Franklin writes a fractal novel, so that a man walks down the street, he gets run over by a bus. But in the other narrative, he falls in love with a woman. And then in the being run over by a bus narrative, he's taken to hospital where he's incredibly seriously ill for months and learns many things about himself. Or he falls in love with his nurse. And in the falling in love with a woman in the street narrative, they get married and live happily, but then in the other narrative, he gets divorced. So it's endlessly bifurcating, and it drives Franklin insane, like Poe's Telltale Heart beating under the floor. But I actually, I'm incredibly attracted to that structure. I would like to write a fractal novel and see if I could remain sane. I think it would be quite good fun for the writer and absolutely appalling for the reader. But I think that fractal novel is sort of at the heart of that structure. My desire to just, it's the kind of it's Borges' labyrinth. It's all of those things, isn't it?
It is, and it's the power of the story of the storyteller to be able to do that. And when it first sort of happened, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm being thrown into this suspension of belief. I've got to go back and then imagine that it plays out differently, and then imagine that it plays out differently again. And by the middle of the novel, I was also beginning to wonder if you had a preferred outcome. And then I realized, without wanting to give anything too much away, that there probably was a preferred outcome. And actually, I don't think it's giving anything away, that the Second World War never happened, really. And at one point, you imagine how it might not have happened.
I was going to do a whole narrative where, because, again, not giving anything away, Ursula does want to stop the Second World War. And I did think I could write a whole chapter in which, the world was different, because one of those, what would happen if Britain had been invaded, what would happen if there was no war narratives. And then I actually just thought, oh, no, I can't be bothered, because it would be taking it to this whole other place of research, I think. So I thought, and also there's a great unity about keeping it with Ursula as well. So I did keep it there, but it's a novel of possibilities, but it's a novel of the doors that aren't opened, just as much as it is the doors that are opened.
You mentioned research. I mean, both this book and I had the great pleasure of reading Life After Life immediately after reading Behind the Scenes at the Museum. So I was able to read the first book and the latest book and go, well, actually, these are very similar books. In many ways, they're about the experience of women over the course of the 20th century. And it's very much about family and women and war in the background. Those are the kind of underlying themes. But in the most recent book, you actually acknowledge that you did a large amount of research, whereas I felt the first book was much more about family memory. Would that be correct in assuming that?
I think I didn't do very much research for the first book, apart from a couple of specific things like a bombing raid, because I was drawing on. I was drawing on a kind of collective memory. It was a kind of collective Yorkshire childhood memory. No, maybe a collective northern childhood memory, which you also have shared. My northern, Sue and I are more or less the same age, and we both had childhood, very similar lives, going to girls' grammar schools and in the north and so on. And I think I drew on not just my experiences, but my experiences with my friends and my family, but also the objects. So there's a lot of, for me, Behind the Scenes is a book about things. It's about objects. And I used a lot of other people's objects as well, without asking them if I could use their, favourite childhood game and all of these things. So it was a much more intimate, personal kind of narrative, very much more my voice. And a lot of people thought that was an autobiographical book, and I was deeply insulted because I thought, it's fiction. I can write fiction. I didn't just sort of spew out, my personal history. But in a way, that was. I think, I don't know about other people, but I think your first novel, you're often putting an awful lot into it that's to do with you. So you were talking earlier to me about a lot of the writers who are mentioned in that book, and in a way, I was just all of the poetry and all of the things that I knew were going into that book. And then after that, I think when you've done that with your first novel, you can start writing properly, as far as I think, so that you start constructing things more. So I I'm much more aware now that writing is an artifact. It's something you put together. It's not just because you can do joined-up writing, you can write a novel. You have to really make it. It's a really artisanal kind of thing to me. I always do this. I always start moving my hands around when I talk about writing, because I think it's a very physical, almost visceral activity, I think. So with this book, it's moved a long way from that sense of being very intimate with it to a different kind of intimacy, because I really enjoyed writing this book. I had a great emotional engagement with this book, just parallel to the kind of emotional engagement I had with behind the scenes, I think. So in that way, they're very alike for me, because I kind of felt them on my pulses, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And the first book is set in York, which was the place of your childhood. And at one point, one of the characters says in that first book, you know, that living in York, you feel the weight of history all the time. You're living in this place that has just got so much history in it that there's no room for the living, as it were, that there was that sense. And I remember, and this is a part of that very British experience of experiencing the history all around you all the time, and it being slightly oppressive. And thinking about objects, I was telling Kate earlier that I'm wearing... When I was thinking about what I should wear, you know, as you do when you're doing something on stage, and I thought, Kate writes about this whole history of families, and I have my grandmother's fichu, and I think it comes from about 1900. It's a little lace thing, and I'm wearing a top that my mother used to wear to the Masonic dinners in the 1950s. And I thought, these objects that I've carried with me actually speak about family history and a connection with the past, which is very, very real. And I had that sense in your books that you use these objects to connect with a time and a people that, for me, live. I mean, they may be a product of your imagination, but they are so vividly real.
Yeah, I like things. I have a lot of things that mean something to me. Just, you know, that I can look at something and it brings... You know, I know where it came from, I know what it means. Whereas my mother was probably incredibly zen in some way, because objects meant nothing to her. So you know, I'd go home and I would just take things out of the house and take them with me, because I knew the next time I went they'd have been thrown away. So I spent a lot of time rescuing the past from my mother. And I think writing is about rescuing the past. That's why Behind the Scenes was all about objects, because you're finding a place for these things. You know, I was talking to... There was a woman came in the signing queue in Auckland, and she'd been in the same school as me. And we were talking about the fact in Behind the Scenes, Ruby has a uniform list, and that is my uniform list from Queen Anne Grammar School in 1963, and I still have it. But I found a place for it in the book, and I think... As I've moved on, it's not been anything to do with me now. It's purely fictional. So Life After Life is a way of finding a place for history, but for other people as well, because the Second World War is about to go out of living memory. And that's always an incredibly poignant point in history, because everything changes once it goes out of living memory. And I wanted to rescue that for me in an act of imagination. So I think I wrote Life After Life for me more than I wrote it for anyone else. Maybe, well, you write all novels for yourself. Yeah.
Yes, and the sense of history of the 20th century, you write it through the experience of families more than anything else. And I read somewhere that someone accused you in writing a book that was anti the family. In Behind the Scenes at the museum, that there's some way in which you write families with such an acerbic eye and an acerbic wit that you are challenging the sanctity of the family.
Oh, well, that was just rubbish. That was some stupid person. Yes, there was a lot of right-wing comment at the time, I seem to recollect. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think anyone would say that now. I like writing about families because you have a ready-made group. You don't have to go out and search for, you know, an audience to write about, or a group of people who work in an office. You have people who have much more complicated relationships in a family and much more interesting dynamics, so that it's almost like it's already there for you. You don't have to do the work when you're writing about families, because you're always going to have all those horizontal and vertical connections, and all of that emotion and drama and you know, hatred and love and kind of feral behaviour that a family encourages within its walls. So I do. I'm an only child, so I come from a very small family, although my parents come from very big families. So I was always very aware that somehow I'd been reduced somehow to this point, and I was always a voyeur in other people's families, and I actually hated being in other people's, you know, visiting other people, because they seemed to behave so badly, and they seemed to be able to be really vicious with each other, and then it was all right. And to me, being vicious with someone was a you know, a point of no return, and so I was never very comfortable with that idea of how families behaved with each other. But I think, you know, still endlessly fascinates.
But it's interesting that you say that you observed other people's families. I mean, I was brought up very much as an only child too, and I was always fascinated by other people's families, especially when they had brothers and sisters, and how that all worked. And I took it all in. I didn't write it down. Were you the kind of child who was, I mean, starting to write? Did you know you wanted to write? Were you writing stories?
No, I never wrote a thing until I was 32. And when I published my first novel at 43, everyone said, "You're very old to be writing a novel." I'm so much older now. I read. I was a reader. I was an only child, so I was a reader. Obviously, I read everything, and I didn't really think that people wrote the things that I read. And then I went into academia, and I wrote academic kinds of things. I mean, I was doing a doctorate, and I think a lot of my creativity went into that. And then I failed my doctorate, and I had this sense of something missing, and I didn't know what it was. And then I started to write, and that gap was filled up. So it took me a long time to realise that.
I wonder,
writing was the thing.
I mean, we both read English at university. I think reading English at university killed my desire to write, actually. Because there was a way in which I adored reading as a child, and then when I went to university and I was required to read all these different things, which I read, of course, as you were required to do. I think we had 1 week to read all of George Eliot, but you did have the summer holidays to kind of prepare. But that notion that you were reading the great, and that you could only write about those, the pleasure of reading and the ability to write both left me through the process of actually studying. So I'm wondering if that was the same experience.
I love studying literature. I love studying books and poetry. I love taking things to pieces. I loved analysing analysing a text, because then when you put it back together, it's so much bigger and fuller. So no, I really liked that. I kind of miss that, really.
But you reference, as you said, you reference literature. I mean, at one point I was thinking, when reading Life After Life, of Virginia Woolf and Orlando, and then I started to think about there are ways in which Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse, there are various ways in which there's a kind of sense of Virginia Woolf's observation of women's experience coming through in your books as well as the Tristram Shandy moment, which I had when I started behind the scenes at the museum, when I went, my goodness, somebody else has read Smollett. But I think you have one of your characters say that they would like to be in a novel by Edith Wharton, or they think they're in a novel by Edith Wharton. Is there a novel that you would like to be in?
Pride and Prejudice. Wouldn't we all?
Quite likely. The other theme that I think comes through in your books is there is a constant sort of... It goes through the Jackson Brodie books as well, of the lost child. That childhood is particularly fragile, and there is no anguish greater than that of a parent who loses a child. And that seems to be a consistent theme. You keep coming back to it. Is there something that triggers that? Or?
No, not at all. I do think it's your greatest fear. And as a mother, I think it's a way of exploring the horror from a safe distance, in the same way that horror films, we can frighten ourselves with horror. Well, I never get frightened by horror films. I try. But, that you have it at a distance and you can manage it and keep it at bay. So I suppose in one way it's that. But then, in a very cold, callous way of the author, it makes for good writing. But But I don't feel in me it's something that I'm needing to write about. I don't really notice that I've written about it, to be honest, until people point it out. I know when Will There Be Good News, I think that's particularly horrible. But it's not something that I'm consciously doing. Perhaps I should say that.
Well, I started, I'm reading case studies, which was the first of the Jackson Brodies, having come to the Jackson Brodies the other way around. And having read Life After Life and then going to case studies, I'm thinking, oh, here we go. We have three stories starting. This is Kate, and then suddenly we have the character of the detective. And I'm wondering why at that point you decided to do that. Why did you introduce a detective into the novel that you were writing at that time?
Well, because I was writing a novel that didn't have a detective in it. You're right, but it started with the two characters, with Amelia and Julia, and with Theo, and they had these backstories that were very long and involved unsolved crimes, and originally they were going to go on a cruise to the Antarctic, which is why it's set in Cambridge, because the Scott Polar Research Centre's there. And because I'd just come back from a cruise to the Antarctic, and I then I realised they were never going to embark on this boat because their backstories were getting so long and they were so interesting. And then I thought, well, they both have unsolved crimes in their background. We need to solve those crimes, and therefore we need a detective. And at the moment I thought, I'll put a detective in the book. I knew it would start to be called crime writing. So I was very wary, because I like crime writing, but I didn't think that I could write a crime novel, because a crime novel to me is goes from A to B. It has a very dynamic, pointed narrative, and I didn't think I could do that. But then I thought, well, I'll just do it my way, really. So yes. So no, it didn't start off as a crime novel.
No, it and there's that sense of it, and then Jackson becomes such an interesting character, and he's so likable in many ways. But of course, we haven't had the television series here, and Jason Isaacs plays them in the TV series.
Have you not? You've not had Case Sisters? No.
I don't think we haven't had it here.
That's what we had. It's available on DVD. Yes, Jason Isaacs is the face of Jackson, and he's very handsome. And I did cast him myself but it's almost impossible to find a British actor who has not played a detective on TV. There's virtually nobody. I think he was the only one left, but and his Yorkshire accent is not up to scratch, as I keep telling him. I have lost the desire to write Jackson since he's had a face, it's true.
I was wondering about that, because this famously happened to Liza Cody, a British author who saw her series on the screen and went, I'm never doing that series. I cannot go back to that character. Whereas I think P.D. James fell in love with the actor that played Dalgleish, but got very upset with an unsuitable job for a woman in Helen Blacksondale. So that interaction between the writer's imagination and what happens when you see your character on screen is a fairly fragile one, I would think.
I don't mind it being Jason. It's not that, really. It's just that it sort of alters. I can write Jackson again, but I will have to have a gap in time so that I'm no longer seeing Jason's face, because Jackson is never, ever, ever described, ever. Not one hair on his head is ever described, so he remains completely available for everyone's imagination. So I need to get back to that point, I think, before I would write him again. But I just got written out on those books, really. I didn't feel that I had anything fresh to write about.
So, have you got another book in mind after Life After Life? Is there one bubbling away? Because usually, of course, writers come on tour and the book's a long way behind and they're already working on something else.
No, I've only just started thinking, but I'm hoping to write a companion to this, which is a book. It's called God in Ruins, which is a quotation from Emerson. He said, "A man is a god in ruins," which I think is such a fantastic sentence. And for a long time, I've been looking for a book I could hang on this. And this book would be it. And it's focused on Teddy, the younger brother. He's a bomber pilot in the Second World War. So I haven't quite worked out how to do it yet. But I'm still in this country, this phase, this war zone, this Fox Corner, I think.
Well, it's an extraordinary place to be, isn't it? And the books are so profoundly about that, and I'm going to say English experience rather than British, because it does seem to me that it's a very English kind of experience of the First World War and the Second World War, and you keep returning to it, and I'm wondering what it is that keeps drawing you back. Is it the objects? Is it the people? Is it the moment? What is it that makes you go back to that particular time span?
Well, I haven't done anything in that time span since Behind the Scenes, so it's been a long time, but I always knew I would go back to the war. I just like I live in Scotland, so in a way I'm in exile, in a kind of very comfortable, non-threatening exile. But nonetheless, my heart is in Yorkshire, my heart is in England, so I think it's just comforting in a way for me to write about being English and looking at that history, which is part of my history, even though I didn't live it, even right through, the whole of the 20th century, I feel is my history. So there is something helpful in me in rendering that into fiction, I think.
And yet, of course, the books are popular all over the world. And why should we be surprised about that? I mean, the comparisons that are made between your work and other writers, not since David Copperfield has anyone kind of done something. So the comparisons are made with Dickens, who, of course, was a huge hit in America. So this Englishness exports very well in one way or another. And what reactions are you getting from readers everywhere? Are they British readers in exile who come to your books? Or?
Well, some, but no. I've been really quite surprised how well it's done in America, because I thought that could be something that they weren't drawn to, but actually they seem... Well, I suppose the success of Downton Abbey should let us know how they would react to that. They like that Englishness a lot in America. I mean, I haven't, none of the foreign translations are out yet, so I don't know how the rest of Europe and the world would take to that. But certainly in America, they seem to really have found something in Life After Life.
Well, in Life After Life, in fact, you take the war to Germany in that you write Ursula in one of her lives goes to Germany and experiences the Second World War on the other side. And in fact, you write very vividly about that experience, which sounds as though it was much, much worse than the experience even in the Blitz in London, that what was going on. And clearly that involved a fair amount of research, I would have thought, that you had to find out what was going on the other side.
When I was researching, I was kind of being fairly even-handed when I was researching. Then I started writing. It was all about the Blitz, and I felt that there was a need to not exactly redress the balance, but for her to see everything from the other side, because there is actually a member of her family who's brought up in Germany, so there was Todd blood on the other side, and I thought it would be quite interesting because the Blitz in Britain was terrible, but it was everything was so much worse in Germany, and I got into that really by Eva Brown, who I became fascinated by. There's not very much literature about Eva Brown. There's only about 2 biographies, but there's a lot of documentary footage, which is very interesting. So that was Ursula's way into Germany, was by becoming friends with Eva Brown. And yes, and my daughters used to come into the house and go, "Oh my God, she's watching things about Hitler again." I did watch an amazing amount of footage of Hitler just to understand the attraction of because it is the banality of evil, and you just think, how could anyone have been so mesmerized? Where is the charisma? I think we look at him now and we cannot understand that pull, that magnetism, but it was so fierce in Germany before the war.
But it doesn't come across in the documentaries, does it?
No, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. It was when I discovered that he farted a lot. That was when I just thought, no.
Yeah, no. I mean, that moustache and the farting, you would think, Eva Brown would have run a mile.
No, she was this beautiful, healthy, attractive young girl who was obsessed with him. But to me, that was a cipher for all of Germany in a way. There was this, this unexplicable erotomania was also Germany.
And meanwhile, you're writing the other side, which is Britain in the Blitz. And I think you've said at one point that one of the reasons why that fascinates you is that it's at a time when Britain was at its best. Britain is actually best when it's under stress in some.
Well, I don't know if that's true now, but I think, you know, we do look back with a huge amount of misplaced nostalgia to the war and to that kind of fighting spirit and keep calm and carry on, all that rubbish, which is just propaganda. It's not actually how people felt. But I do think that there's a certain simplicity about the way that we were so stoic. I can't imagine we'd be so stoic nowadays. You know, there was a lot of grace under pressure, which was admirable, I think.
We're going to open up for some questions in a moment or two, but I think it also brings me back to when you're writing about the Blitz in London, the role of the women in the Blitz and the women taking over. And of course, there's been this extraordinary incident in London in the last couple of days where the young army guy was hacked down in the street, and there was this woman on the bus passing by who was the scout mistress who saw someone on the ground and got off to assist. And she went into the fray and tried to talk down and the guys and said, "What do you want?" and was talking to the people holding these weapons. And I thought, my God, she's one of Kate Atkinson's women. You know, she's one of the women from the Blitz who dealt with things, who went to help. That extraordinary kind of resilience of the ordinary person who is immeasurably heroic under stress.
Well, it's a kind of, but it's selflessness that, you know, I worry is fading from our society because we're so driven by ego and celebrity that, you know, that kind of stout-heartedness, I think, is utterly admirable.
It was, and women's experience during the war, of course, being so many of them working on the land, the ones that were younger fit, but being left behind. And I think you've written about, was it your father who came up from the mine one day and saw a glow in the sky and said, "There's Sheffield burning." That sense that England was being bombed constantly. My father's war was spent on the west coast, keeping an eye out for the invasion from the western approaches, and he learnt to be a gentleman and learnt how to golf and fish. And my mother, meanwhile, was bombed out 3 times, living near the shipyards in the northeast of England. The experiences of war were so different for so many people in England, and I think you bring that so vividly to life in your books that I feel as though I've been through a journey through my personal family history through reading your books, and I want to thank you for that so much.
I'm glad to hear that.
Do we have any questions from the audience? We have mics at the side, but you will actually have to come and get to the mic or stand up or pass your question along. And I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see you, because these are my long-distance glasses. And that's better. Oh, we've got one up the back, and she's right there. Thank you. Come on down and grab the mic.
Hi, thank you. Kate, given you've written across different genres and you've been very successful, I wondered if you could tell us what you think makes your books successful pieces of literature or art, whatever you'd like to call them. Like, what makes them good books?
I have no idea. If I knew that, I would be bottling it and selling it. I don't know. I write... No, I don't know. I always think that... I think, and it's true of a lot of writers, that I put the best part of me into books, and I think... But that isn't what makes a good book. But I think I'm quite an honest writer. I never think about if I'm revealing anything about myself. So I probably do all the time, and I do think people respond to that in books in a way. But honestly, I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, it's not up to me to say I write good books anyway. So I don't know.
I think there's another question there. I was going to add into that there's the element of surprise, which is that one goes from sadness to tragedy to moments of laugh out loud laughter. And one of your characters is watching CSI at one moment, the television series, and they're looking at Gil Grissom and they say, "Oh my God, he walks like a bear in a nappy." And I just erupted into giggles. You do that to me every now and again. I'll come across something which just floors me because it's so inventive and so clear and so funny. So that's one of the things that I absolutely love. Sorry, we had another one over here. Yeah.
Thank you. Kate, I'd like to thank you very much for many hours of pleasure reading your books. Also lots of envy at such a great writer. The question I wanted to ask you, which was actually a good lead-in from Sue, about this question of surprise. I've recently finished Life After Life. I couldn't wait for the next book. And I read it on a Kindle, so I'm going click, 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 next page, next page. And then it was finished. And I thought, shit, what's going to happen now? How did you come to that? I felt that flow that you were using, that you mentioned through the book. It carries you, and you sort of suspend all your sort of preconceptions and just go with it. And I was so into it, and then it ended. And I was a bit cross with you, actually.
They do that. I think, as far as I'm concerned, it's always February the 11th, 1910, and it's snowing in that book, so it never ends. So although it finishes, it doesn't. If that's any help to you, it goes on. I worry about people who are reading it on Kindles and Kobos and so on, because I think you need to do a lot of checking sometimes with the dates, and I think that's really quite hard. It wasn't written for a Kindle, I would like to say, in my defence. So
I think it's wonderful that you've actually written somewhere about that ending, Robin, which is, and somewhere in that past, in the ethereal world of fiction, it is always a snowy night in February 1910, and Mrs. Haddock is always settling down to her third tot of rum. And that I think is the perfect ending, which is, Mrs. Haddock, who we meet in the first, and she's a very Dickensian character, who's coming along to help with the birth of the baby. And doesn't make it in this version. And there she is at the end of the book, settling down for her third tot of rum. Do we have another question? Yep.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry. The whole time I was reading the book, I was wondering how you could possibly plot such a chronologically complex story. Do you visually, I guess it's part of the writing process, how can you possibly keep it all straight?
For me, it actually it was simpler to write than it might appear, I have to say. So it was just one life after another. But I do, usually when I'm writing, I have a moleskin storyboard notebook that I can just kind of keep track of. It's more the thing I keep track of is how old people are at a certain time and whether they're the right ages. And is Teddy 2 years? If Teddy's 5 in 1920, then how old is Morris? Those kinds of things. But it was surprisingly easy for me to follow all the time. I always knew where I was. I usually keep the whole of a book in my head while I'm writing it, and then immediately forget it. But that's, I think, probably, I don't know. I never talk to other writers about writing. I only know one other writer. She's my best friend, and we never talk about writing. So I don't know what other writers do, but I suspect that a lot of writers do hold the whole book in their head, because then you always know where everyone is. Whereas if you're writing it down all the time, I think I would lose track of it if I was actually making notes and, big storyboard things like that. And I have really good copy editors also who kind of rectify all my mistakes.
Okay. We got another question? Allow for a thought. Yep, somebody coming up the front. There we go.
Hi, I'm interested to know about writing practices, and I'm really interested to know what happens when you finish that manuscript. How long until you go on to the next one? Do you need a grieving time until you do so?
No, I don't grieve. I'm delirious with happiness when I finish a book. I redraft as I go along, so I don't have a big redraft at the end. And if I have got redrafting to do, I'll make sure I've done it before I get to the last chapter, because the last chapter is always a gift to myself, because by the time I get to the end of a book, I know, I always kind of know where I want to end up, but by the time I'm nearing the end, I know what I want the last chapter to be. So I then kind of get everything done, and then I write the last chapter. And I rarely redraft the last chapter because I've just got to the point where I know exactly how I want to be, and then that's it. And I'm incredibly happy. And I just potter about. I spend a long time pottering about. I'm famous for just tidying out all my drawers and all my cupboards, and just being incredibly happy not to be writing, basically. And then I start to think about writing again. And just at the point where I think, I could start writing, I do publicity for the last book, and then that gets knocked off. So, but what happens by the time I really start writing another book is that I'm like a greyhound in a trap, because I've kind of been thinking quite a long time and I'm ready to go. And people always say, how long does it take to write a book? And it seems to take me 2 years. And I have no idea how many hours in that... Sorry, I'm losing my voice. How many hours in that 2 years I actually write. Probably a very small amount of time, but... Who knows? I feel I should get a clicker so I can just click every hour that I'm writing so I can answer that question more accurately.
There's some water there, Kate.
Thank you.
You're beginning to get a little bit hoarse.
I am.
Not unsurprising. We've got another question. Yep.
Oh, thank you for your talk. I've only read 3 of your books and love them all, so thanks for that. The character Regina in When Will There Be Good News, I just thought she was so gorgeous. And I was wondering if you've put her in any of your other books, or you plan to do anything else with that character.
People ask me about Reggie a lot. She's really popular. The trouble with Reggie is she's 16, and it's being 16 that makes her Reggie. And I have thought about bringing Reggie back in another book, but she would be older, and I don't think she would have the same kind of luminosity that she has because she's at that particular age. I think Reggie, growing older, Reggie would be more cynical, and I don't think I want her to be more cynical. So, but I would like to bring quite a lot of characters back, maybe from different books. Well, maybe the Jackson Brodie books rather than lots of different books, because I'm particularly fond of Gloria from One Good Turn. I feel she deserves another, go round, and Titania, her Russian sidekick. So there could be a whole novel of just bringing back the characters from Jackson Brodie novels, and I think that would be quite enjoyable, actually. So perhaps Reggie does have a future.
Well, I think that's very appropriate. I think Teddy says it in Life After Life. What if we could do it all again until we got it right? And so we're going to just keep doing it again until we get it right. Do we have any more questions? I think this might be a very good moment. Oh, we've got one from a gentleman in the front. We're going to allow a male voice here. The question was whether whether Kate is reluctant to go back to Jackson Brodie because they buggered up the scripts for the TV series.
Well, no, not entirely, because I made my peace with that, because books are books and TV's TV, and no, it's not the case. I'm more all right with it than you would think, because I've kind of got to the point where I don't care. So no, that's not the reason. It's just that it's been too much. So the TV and 4 books is too much, and I still think I would be thinking that I'm not going to write another one just now, even if it wasn't for the TV. But I agree. There could have been better.
Well, I would love to see Kate Jackson, sort of downtown Doctor Who time-travelling, the Downton Abbey Doctor Who, combination of Life After Life, where we kept, going forwards, the time-travelling was happening, the rewinding, the doing it again. I can imagine an absolutely extraordinary television series which would be part dream and part hallucination and part compelling storytelling. Kate, you've given us so much pleasure, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your writing history and everything that you've given us tonight. Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you as well. Thank you.